Greetings and welcome to Berkeley Writers at Work. I'm Maggie Sokolik, Director of College Writing Programs, which sponsors this annual event. College Writing is currently celebrating its 30th year as a program on campus, and we are so happy to include today's event in our celebrations. Our guest today is Beth Piatote, creative writer, playwright, and scholar. She's written 2 books, including a mixed genre collection, The Beadworkers Stories, published by Counterpoint in 2019, which was longlisted for the Aspen Words Literary Prize and the Penn Bingham Prize, and shortlisted for the California Independent Booksellers Association Golden Poppy Prize for Fiction. Her full-length play, Antigone, was selected for the 2020 Festival of New Plays by Native Voices at the Autry, and has been supported by readings with the New York Classical Theater and the Indigenous Writers Collaborative at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. It is the retelling of the Greek tragedy Antigone, in which a Native American family is torn apart over the fate of ancestral remains held by a museum. Her short play, Tricksters Unite, was featured in the 2022 Native Voices Short Play Festival at the Autry and the La Jolla Playhouse. Her short stories and poems have appeared in Poetry, Kenyon Review, Epiphany, and numerous other journals and anthologies. She is currently completing a poetry collection, Nez Perce Word for Shark, and a novel. She's an Indigenous language activist and a founding member of Luke Upsime, North Star Collective, a group dedicated to using creative expression for Nez Perce language revitalization. She is one of the co-creators and current chair of the designated emphasis in Indigenous language revitalization at Berkeley. Her current scholarly projects include articles on Indigenous language revitalization with a focus on Nez Perce literature and language, and a book manuscript on Indigenous literature, law, and the senses. She's an associate professor of comparative literature and of English, and the director of the Arts Research Center. She is Nimipu, or its exonym Nez Perce, enrolled with Colville Confederated Tribes. I'd be remiss if I didn't say a word about our interviewer as well. John Levine, the coordinator of Berkeley Writers at Work, has been a lecturer in college writing programs going on 25 years, teaching both writing and public speaking courses. He holds a BA in English and Black Studies from Oberlin College and an MFA in creative writing from San Francisco State University. Before becoming a teacher, he worked in radio and television. An award-winning playwright and screenwriter himself, John's plays have been produced throughout the US, as well as in Canada, Mexico, India, Australia, the Philippines, the United Arab Emirates, and the UK. Please give a round of applause that only you will hear for our guest and interviewer.
Do I just jump in?
It's all yours.
Okay, Katsuyo. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you and congratulations to this program for supporting writing in its many amazing forms. I'm really happy to have this chance to read and also to have a discussion with all of you about how we write and why we write. So I decided that I would read out of my book, The Beadworkers, and I'm going to read from the opening of the book. And the book opens with a triptych, a 3-part piece, and each one is called Feast. Feast 1, Feast 2, and Feast 3. And just to give you a little help as you're following along, I was inspired by the Maori poet, Robert Sullivan, to use our Indigenous aesthetics in our writing. And I was thinking, what would that look like? And I decided to experiment with using our community feast as a literary structure. And in our feasts, the foods always appear, the foods from our homelands always appear in the same order. And so as we're moving through each of these feast pieces, these foods are being offered up in the text in the order in which they always appear in the feast. and they always begin and end with kus. So that's where I will start and end today. Piece 2. Kus. I had a dream not long after I started. Some people say that when you start dreaming in a language, that's when you know it's become fluent to you. But I know this can't possibly be so. I think I maybe knew 20 or 30 words at the time, mostly nouns and greetings and a few verbs. But I had this dream and it was beautiful. In the dream, I saw a longhouse at Nespelem, and on the side of the longhouse, I saw clearly this word, pine, arrival. I woke just then, suddenly, and as I woke, I heard my own voice say, Paitsa, I'm coming, I'm arriving. The shock of hearing my voice impressed upon me the feeling of the dream. That dream helped me persevere when I felt small, when I was alone, when I looked at the enormity of it all. There were times I was discouraged when I faced the entire ocean of words and I feared the undertow would pull me under, like an eagle who is dragged into the current of a river, talons locked on the back of a salmon. Later, I would learn another word and I would hold it just as close, say it to myself, to the sky, say to Phil and to those who spoke, Paitsa, Paitoksa, I'm coming back. Not so. He is from a salmon tribe over that way, over to the coast, and his tribe got terminated. I don't know why, but folks around there stopped. Maybe it was a dark time for them, but they gave up the salmon ceremony, all them, except this one guy. That's not something to do with just one person, but he did. Not even his family came. Some of his own people got on him, went hard on him for doing that. And maybe it wasn't right to do it that way, just he alone. I know that man. He's stubborn. He don't care. 8, maybe 10 years like that. He kept it up all alone. After that, people started coming back. Now you go over there to salmon ceremony with them, and there's hundreds of people there. Not even all them know this story, but it's true. Wewukia. The animals help us. We know this from the old stories from when the world was coming to be, and the animal people offered themselves to us, each in their way, each one in order. And still they offer themselves to us. A few years ago, I saw a photograph in the newspaper of a ship in the Pacific Ocean headed north. The ship was bearing the ancestors and belongings of the Haida Gwaii people. The ship was carrying them back home, bringing them home from a museum. So there was the ship headed north, and in front of the ship, leading the procession, was a bald eagle flying in the sky, and swimming alongside the ship, cresting with the waves, was a pod of killer whales. They traveled that way all along the Pacific coast, all the way home. The animals help us. We know this from the old stories, from family stories, from court stories. I know a story that's happening right now about a man who called upon an elk to help him, and the elk came to his aid, and now the man is in court. But listen, this is a good story. You see, the man is Sinicht from north of here. Many years ago, the Sinicht people were suffering from smallpox. They were weakened, and the Canadian miners and settlers hunted those people down, drove them out of their homeland. The survivors came to us for refuge. We took them in, and now they're strong again. Here we call them the Lakes people, but they never stopped wanting to go back, or going back, in fact, to visit their homelands and hunt. Canada, in the meantime, decided the Sinicht were extinct and extinguished their rights. But the Sinicht people are still alive, and so are their rights. A few years ago, one of those unextinct Sinicht men killed an elk in his homelands. Then he called the game officials in Canada and turned himself in. They took the bait. When the province pressed charges against him for taking big game without a license, he pleaded not guilty. He cited his Aboriginal rights to hunt in his own territory. And now that case is in court, and Canada, will have to look at that man standing in the middle of the room and all his people around him, and Canada will have to admit that the Sinicht are not extinct. The Sinicht man is very brave, and so is the elk who gave himself. That man and that elk knew each other from long ago. They met in dreams and sweat, blood and forest. The man needed the elk. The people needed the elk. Without the elk, there would be no case, no path home, no court for the man to present himself to the state and say, "We are alive." EMIS. From the Colville Confederated Tribes, TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families Survey. What are the responsibilities of a father? What are the responsibilities of an uncle? Should a deer be considered acceptable payment in lieu of cash? Shit on. And this one, you need to remember this. This root is good for nursing mothers. Chemis. After World War II, advances in astrophysics allowed humans to see their planet from space. In 1972, the Apollo 17 took the most famous photograph of Earth, the blue planet. It might be fair to say that since the mid-20th century, humans have seen things that were never within their visual grasp before. But do we have better dreams? Have we seen better things? I think I would give up my fridge magnet of planet Earth, every glimpse of snowy mountain folds from the window of a plane, the glittering view of Paris from the Eiffel Tower on New Year's Eve. I would give up all those things to see what our ancestors saw, to dream their vivid dreams, to come over a mountain with my mothers and sisters and suddenly see in the wide open an enormous blue meadow of blooming camas, an endless unbroken field of periwinkle, lake, and lapis that today you could barely imagine, a land breathing and rolling with blue, a land so beautiful you would wonder how to find your voice, find your offering, draw out a song on your breath, and press the strength of your body to the earth, into the deep, wild blue. Chaos. From the Treaty of 1855, Article 3. The exclusive right of taking fish in all the streams where running through or bordering said reservation is further secured to said Indians, as also the right of taking fish at all usual and accustomed places in common with citizens of the territory, and of erecting temporary buildings for curing, together with the privilege of hunting, gathering roots and berries, and pasturing their horses and cattle upon open and unclaimed land. Tim's. We'd been camping for several days, and then we packed up to go home. It was August, hot, and we were going down a dry, dusty mountain road when we saw these big bushes loaded with chokecherries right beside a little stream. We stopped there and picked until we filled 2 big buckets, which took a long time, and I have to admit we were not the most agreeable children at that time. We were tired and sweaty and wanted to go home. But my parents simply could not drive past those trees aflame with ripeness. We picked, we complained, we spit out the bright red ones, too bitter to eat raw, but filled with pectin and good to keep. Our parents did not scold us. The next day, my mother and I cooked the fruit down, strained it through cheesecloth, and made jelly. We poured the jelly into a mismatched collection of jars and small glasses and sealed them with paraffin wax. We laughed at how long it took to pick those buckets and how much fruit it took to make each little jar, which, when held to the light of the late afternoon sun, cast a rosy glow on the kitchen table. Semitre. Coyote carried on his back 5 agate knives and pure fir pitch and a flint for making a fire. After some time, he made the grasses sway, and again Coyote shouted at the monster, "It's wild sich! Let's inhale each other." At that point, Monster suddenly saw the grasses moving, and he said, "Now then, you little Nisawelu, you first inhale me." Then Coyote tried, and he made Monster stagger a little bit. Coyote said to him, "Now me, you inhale. Now that everyone, all the titokana you have just eaten, take me too, lest I become lonely." Thus he insisted, and now the monster inhaled him. Just that way, Monster took Coyote in, and as he went flying through the air, Coyote placed each one along the way, the titilu roots and the titilu huckleberries and titilu service berries, saying, "Here the Indian people will find them, and they will be happy. In only a short time away, the human beings are coming." Rain came in abundance after years of drought in California, and we had no desire to complain about the gift of water. We wore our boots and beaded medicine bags and assembled on the steps, held our soggy banners aloft. Some of us had been to the camp, some not. We each did what we could. I marched with thousands in DC, also in the rain, and later sent money and supplies. I followed the stories of tribal delegation and ordinary activists to Ocheti, Sakowin, protests in Spokane, Seattle, the capital. We shouted, we marched, we wrote, we prayed, we drummed and sang and rang bells. We lifted our hands with eagle feathers and banners and holy anger, the anger of Jesus storming the temple, the holy fire of Chief Joseph, Sitting Bull, Martin Luther King. I saw my kin lean against the bitter winter with hand-lettered signs that said, "Kus hiwes wakus." Water is life, water is alive. All life begins and ends with water, our mothers, the rivers, the rain. From the beginning of time to the end of time, the word we carry on our breath, the taste of this world on our tongues and our tears, is alive, is life, is kus. Katsiao, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was wonderful, beautiful. You know, I've read that story twice before you read it, and hearing you read it this time around, I got even more out of it. There's so much packed into it. And actually, I did have a question about the writing, but I want to jump right to reading.
Yeah.
If I may say so, you're a wonderful reader, and I'm wondering, do you read aloud as you're writing? These voices are clearly different voices in your writing process. Do you find yourself reading aloud?
Yeah, I have to, and I find it so useful, no matter what I'm writing. So whether I'm writing something creative or writing a piece of scholarship, when you read it aloud, you find out if the sentence is too convoluted, if the sentence isn't, I mean, I think no matter what kind of writing we're doing, we have to write from our own voice, and that literal voice, giving voice to your work, is really important. And one of the things that's actually challenging about reading this piece is that only a few of those voices are what I would consider my voice. There's only a couple of those pieces that were my actual stories. And so having to do my auntie's voice or having to do other kinds of bureaucratic voices, all of those things that bring out the texture, I think it's very useful to read out loud.
But you hear them in your head as you're writing. You
do hear them. And this is one of the hard things about trying to do a res accent, which I have to say I'm not the best at, is that I hear those voices and write them, but it's very hard to represent that voice just in the text, because so much of it is based in inflection and rhythm and a certain way of clipping the sound, of creating glottals, I guess I should say, that are, I think, ways that are sort of forms of speech that come out of indigenous languages that are being sort of retained in the movement to English. But if you just look at the page, you don't necessarily see that. But then once you hear it, then you will hear that voice of that person coming out of that text.
So Feast 2 is part of a, I don't know if you call it a triptych. I mean, there are three parts. There's Feast 1, Feast 2, and Feast 3, and each is a distinctly different form. Feast 1 appears to be a poem on the page. I don't know if you'd agree. So you talked a little bit about the inspiration and from the Maori writer, you wanted to try, transposing this to a Nez Perce tradition. But I'm wondering about each of the forms. Did you conceive of this as a three-part piece? Can you just more about the origin, how these three pieces came together?
Oh, thank you. So I did write just the poem first, and poem is also difficult to read out loud because it has no punctuation and the phrases are falling upon themselves all the way through, and it moves back and forth between first person and second person. And one of the things I wanted to capture in that poem was a sense of the eternal movement of time, but also the turning of seasons and the different worlds in which these feast foods are sort of eternally blending subjectivities. It's hard to describe unless you're looking at the poem. But so that was one way of thinking about this. What I wanted, so that was one thing I did, was thinking about how to bring out the essence of the eternal in that poetic form. And it just happened that one day I was walking down the sidewalk and I suddenly got the idea of doing this second piece, which was, the way I conceptualized it was like, well, I want to lay out the dishes in front of people and help them understand, because I can't translate the words because we've never translated the words. But I thought it'll be richer for anyone who wants to read this. And I have all these little stories that are my stories that come across time and space, that also get to the sense of the eternal structure of the feast, but always being able to eat, that each person's lifetime then experiences different moments of relating to those first foods. And so, our lives as Native people, we have stories that are long ago, eternal stories of coyote. We have stories from the treaties. We have stories from our own families, from our own lives. There are all of these different worlds that exist in each of these dishes. But I just wanted to offer little stories as like little dishes that are being laid out, but that will help people understand, oh, Imes means deer and Wawukia is elk. And oh, I see what these are now, without ever having to translate. So that the story is doing the work of translation instead of there being a direct translation. And that's also one way to think about the work of stories. They help us apply one thing to another. So there's a little kind of epistemological work that's there too. But mostly it was just really fun to make these little dishes and imagine them being put out, because the way the feast is organized is that it always begins and ends with kus, with water, because water is the beginning and end of everything. And then the order in which the traditional stories tell us that the animals offer themselves to us. So salmon was first, and then elk, and then deer, and then the roots and berries appear in the order in which they appear on our lands. And so there's this important almost calendar that's also being expressed, because many of our neighboring tribes, up in Washington and Oregon, they have this same longhouse feast tradition. But sometimes the order of their roots or berries, slightly different. And it's because of where their lands are in relationship to how the sun hits them and when they sort of appear. And so it's also part of expressing our relationship to our place in the world. And then the third piece is a very conventional short story, and it's set in the 1920s, but it's, you know, the story of a woman living through grief and finding hope and resilience. And so it's a very conventional story, but if you look, the stripped down structure of the feast appears in English and in I think I retained a couple of the native terms. Maybe not. I think they all appear in English. But it begins and ends with water, and then you see salmon, venison, roots, and huckleberries. So what I was again trying to say, and this is, I think, also a larger comment on what it is to be Indigenous, is that we have these structures that are eternal, that are so solid and sure that we can change the form around it, and it is still Indigenous, it is still our own. Like the structure has the stability. And so I think maybe no one has made this exact literary structure before, but it seems that people that the sureness of this structure allows people to experience it, even though it may feel unfamiliar, that they can still have some kind of confidence moving through it that this structure's gonna work.
And it does, absolutely. And there's, I mean, it's working on an unconscious level. You know, I hadn't noticed the first couple of times I read Feast 3, the structure, how it sort of does mirror the other feasts. But now that you mention it, I look at that. And I actually wanted to ask you about translation, because you're talking about linguistic translation, but also there's a conceptual translation. You know, you're sharing this tradition that every reader who reads your stories may not be familiar with. So I'm wondering, as you compose, how aware or how concerned are you about making this accessible? Do you intend non-Nez Perce readers, who are, I assume, most of your readers, to understand the meaning and context, or is that beside the point? Is part of the experience of reading it, experiencing the language, the tradition as they read?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I try to be as welcoming as possible to the reader, but I know that I know that when I read stories, I always take in things at different levels, and I accept that some things I don't have the requisite knowledge to understand everything. I know I'm always missing certain references, and I accept that. And one of the things I wanted to do is I am writing for other Nez Perce people, other Indigenous people. They're my primary audience, and so I do want to represent the world through my understanding of what it is to be an Indigenous person. And I think once there's a big movement toward bringing others in, when there's a translation of something, an explanation, then I feel that the central audience of Indigenous people can be pushed aside in favor of being accessible to others. And I think I do want to emphasize that the opening is a feast. It's like, come in, you are welcome. I want to give you something. But also, you might not get it right away or something, but, you know, just please accept this gift. And it is a site of struggle. Like, how much do translate or explain. There are other parts in the book that I do have footnotes to, because there's part of me that doesn't want people to miss some of the things that I find so beautiful about our language and our practices. But back to the main question, which was, are you concerned about? I want to be welcoming. I want to be kind to my readers. It's very generous of readers to spend time with our work. And so I want it to feel comfortable and welcoming and, positive. But also I want to privilege Indigenous experience at the center of the book. So I hope that
Absolutely.
works. Okay.
and it's a good plug for close reading as well. Many of the people in our audience are student writers who are working on their craft as readers and writers. And it's so nice to hear you say, and I tell my students this, the same thing. Sometimes I don't get everything. I mean, mostly I don't get everything the first time I read it. And it takes some, you have to spend some time with it. A writer spends a lot of time working on whatever she writes, and likewise a reader. Sometimes it doesn't have to be arduous, but there is some investment in the reading process.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, actually I want to move on to you have several different types of stories, and well, actually let's back up for a second. You acknowledge that Feast 1 takes the form of a poem. The Beadworkers, the subtitle is Stories. Do you consider all of these pieces stories? And let me just add, I consider a story is a story is a story, but I don't want to give you a leading question. But what is your feeling about this? How do you classify this? Is a poem a story? Is a play a story?
Yes and no, because I also respect the genre, but I also think of story as in the terms of this book is that stories are about explaining how things came to be, or stories are little gifts that will help you bear something or understand something, and so yes, people have pointed this out. It's several publishers who rejected the manuscript were like, what is this? It opens with a poem and then a thing, and then it ends with a play, like what? And so, but when I'm thinking about stories and form, the reason why there's so many forms in this is because they each needed a different form to be what it was. And so when I wrote the play Antigone at the end and just, sat there with my copy of Sophocles and looked at, I always imagined this just being a story about how things came to be and a story of a problem that people would read, just like they would pick up Sophocles and read it in their, literature class. And then it became a play. So I have a very expansive sense of what a story is.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah, and I definitely wanted to talk about Antigone, but do you, when you get an idea for a story, or when you get an idea about something to write, does the form present itself immediately? Do you know, okay, this has to be a poem, this has to be a play, or do you just start writing and you go, oh my gosh, that's a poem, oh my gosh, that's a play, oh my gosh, that's a story, or do you not even label it?
I guess stories come in different ways, because sometimes a story comes out of, the form of a story comes out of a joke, like Wyndon was just started as a joke, just joking with people. What would an Indian version of Monopoly look like? Oh, the opposite of Monopoly. It's like you win by having the most giveaways. And then the story of the two friends and going back and forth, and that just kind of presented itself. I think often a first line will come, and then the the form will start taking shape. But sometimes the form comes first, like with Antigone. So all of it's always a different process, and it's kind of I think that the story knows what it wants to be, and it's just a matter of tuning into it and finding its characters to tell you what it is. But a lot of things just start with a first line, and then I'm like, okay, now what? So,
Yeah. Well, as I said, I definitely want to talk about Antigone. Plays are my thing. That's my jam. So I want to hear about that. Did you have the idea in the back of your head that, wow, this would work to tell an Indigenous story through the lens of Antigone? Were you drawn to Sophocles' play and you wanted to give a different spin on it? Do you remember what the seed was for that piece?
I remember it plain as day. So all of those things that you just suggested are how it came to be. I read Antigone in 9th grade and I loved it. I thought it was the most amazing thing. And so I've always loved the play. And then in 1996, this big event happened where these two teenagers came across the ancestral remains of someone who came to be known as the Ancient One or Kennewick Man. They found his remains in the Columbia River in 1996. And immediately the Columbia River tribes were saying, that's our ancestor, because the remains were 9,000 years old. Like, clearly he belongs to us. We were here 9,000 years ago. You weren't. So pretty much. And no, he was taken away and became symbolic of the struggle between tribes and science and government, the state, and the care, the holding of ancestral remains. And so it was at that moment in 1996, I was like, what's wrong with these people? Don't they read their own literature?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and if Antigone is a universal story about what it is to be human, what are state laws compared to eternal laws, what do the living owe the dead, all of these essential human questions, then why aren't Native people able to get our ancestors back? Either we're not human, we're not part of that human structure, or they're not human. So that's the point at which I wanted to implicate Western society on its own terms, and to say your humanity is at stake because you do not recognize our humanity. And the form, I actually tried to write some different kinds of story within a story things, like the tribe gets an NEH grant to stage the classics on the reservation, and they, do something different. Or I tried to stage one that was set at a university, because a lot of university museums, including our very own, hold ancestral remains, and there are often protests. And so when I was at the University of Oregon as a student, I was involved in protests there. So I imagined it, set in the Native Student Union, and there are students who are in the play, the Greek play, and then they're going straight from rehearsal to a protest. Anyway, I tried to make that kind of conventional story within a story thing, and it never gelled. And then I just stopped working on it for like 10 years. I just set it aside. And then I got this job at Berkeley, and I was working here, and I was walking past the Hearst every single day. And all of a sudden, one day, I thought, what if the polis is the museum, and Creon is the head of the museum, and he's Native? And there is this argument about not about the importance of ancestral remains, but the struggle within a system of colonialism that a family then can tear itself apart over the means toward a shared end. And that became a much more interesting question to me. And I think something that's relevant for any social movement is people agreeing on the importance of a problem and being committed to it, but then having different access to power and also different strategies toward a shared end.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
then I just decided I'm going straight up Sophocles. I'm going to write it as a play.
Yeah, I mean, and it hews pretty closely. I did go back and look
Yeah.
at Antigone, and it's really amazing. I mean, and it doesn't feel like forced. I mean, it's its own story, Antigone, that you're telling. So I was really curious about that, you know, the process. And what's really interesting is that you had this idea, and then it wasn't working, or you just decided to set it aside, and then years later,
Mhm,
it gelled for you.
mhm.
And you know, we often tell our students, you know, maybe you have to start early. I mean, just to bring it home to how our students write, and then you may have to let it sit for a bit and mull over it. You know, there is a part of the writing process where you just have to let things gel. Sometimes you have 10 years, you don't always have 10 years, but this came to you. I want to pivot a little bit here and move to your scholarly writing, because
Mhm.
besides being a creative writer, you are also an academic writer. You know, of course, I read your book, Domestic Subjects, Gender, Citizenship, and Law in Native American Literature. And I'm curious about, just generally, is scholarly writing different from creative writing for you?
Yes and no. I do find scholarly writing very creative and almost, I think one of the joys of it, and I think this is something that you also will enjoy as a playwright, is collaboration. So I think like close reading and sort of bringing out dimensions, the profound dimensions of a creative writer's work, that almost feels collaborative, where you get to really spend time with the text and have your mind in this text and try to, you know, it's this beautiful puzzle, and then think, okay, so how now am I going to create this argument that flows? And the fact that you get to, like with close reading, you're bringing in the words and the phrases. It's like you're bringing in the DNA of that creative writer's work into your own work, and it's, you know, you're trying to create this beautiful thing that will illuminate what you see so beautiful and profound about this other work. So, and really thinking about the level of craft then too is part of what's so satisfying about that scholarly work. I love to read scholarship, especially that's well written, because it is just part of that illumination of like, oh, I see that. I never had that thought before, and this person is bringing it to me and explaining it to me, and now I can take it with me. So one thing I do care a lot about in both creative work and scholarly work is, you know, clarity and the shape of the argument, structure of the argument, rhythm of the sentences, using all of the toolkit, breaking the rules a little bit, having short sentences, short paragraphs, all kinds of things. Do whatever you have to do to make the argument work, make your form work, and trust your instincts. I think that's something. Trust your instincts, and then also be very committed to form. Like, know what you're doing so that your reader can trust you and follow you as you move through an argument.
So in your scholarly writing, is there a parallel with your creative writing that the form presents itself? You kind of get if I'm understanding your creative process correctly, that you kind of early in the process, you kind of are following the form, you see where the form's taking you, would you say? And I guess I'm asking, conceptually, does the same thing happen inside your brain? Maybe you don't know, but I'm asking you now.
Yeah, I think I do. I am thinking about structure from the very beginning, because the structure, structure is performing the argument. Within academic writing, you have a narrower set of choices. But I think it's very important to think about academic writing as a genre, just like poetry and fiction or whatever. Okay, so what are the expectations? What are the conventions of this genre? And what are its unique capacities? How do I maximize the unique capacities of this form to maximize the things that I have to say, that I see, that I want to bring into the world? I think one thing that is very similar about my scholarly work and my creative work is that I'm always asking the exact same questions. They're all motivated by the same kinds of desires of wanting to show how Indigenous people survive and how families are affected by colonization, and how love and the structures of our intimate relationships are affected by colonization. All those things sort of filter through everything that I write. And it's funny because I think, oh, now I'm doing something completely different, but it's always, and so this is the good thing, is that we have a compass that is always going to be bringing us to the same things. And so that's why I think, oh, okay, trust your instinct, but be willing to try out so many things to be true to that like vision that you have.
I was going to ask you, when did you become aware of that compass or those explicit questions? Was it after you'd written a bit, or I mean, in your writing career, did you look back and go, oh, this is what I'm concerned about? Or did you know this as you set out to be a writer?
I didn't know it. I realized it after Domestic Subjects came out, that I really do have a focus on these particular things. So yeah, it wasn't conscious.
Yeah, well, and it's great that you know now. Let's dial it way back.
Okay.
How did you come to writing? Tell us how you and writing got together.
Well, to go way back, I grew up on a farm, and I think part of it is being an avid reader as a child, and I think growing up on a farm was important to my development for two reasons. One is that's the only way you can know anything about the world, or other people's experiences. Is reading. You get to go other places, and I think I loved reading for that. But also because it's a world of solitude. My cousins were there, but then it's just like a lot of farmland. You spend all summer basically only seeing people on Sunday, other people on Sunday. And so there's a lot of time that you are, just having to entertain your own mind while you are working in the fields or doing the stuff you do on a farm, caring for animals. And so I think as a kid, right away was developing. I remember writing a little book like when I was 5 and, reading this book out loud to people and stuff like that. So I think I just had that idea about myself when I was pretty young. So I would tell anybody, if you were loving books and making little books when you were a kid, you're a writer. And then if you're doing it now, you're also a writer.
Yes, that's true.
I always wrote for myself. Like I always kept a journal, and that all of that writing counts. If writing is part of the way you experience the world, you're a writer, and you should feed that because that's living for you.
Who did you read? Were you reading widely, or did you have specific interests when you were younger?
You know, when I was a kid, I read like all the things that kids read, you know, Beverly Cleary and Little House on the Prairie, and, you know, all those kinds of things. I went through this binge reading phase when I was like in 6th grade, where my best friend and I read like every Western we could. And part of this was growing up on a farm in Idaho. There was a public library in my town, but the only place you could buy a book was the grocery store. And so it was either like romances or Westerns. And so I read like 80 Westerns. And there was like there was a lot of pleasure in that. Because a lot of them are really well written, for one thing, and they're set in the West, but there was pleasure in taking your $1.75 and buying your own book. You know, that was, I think, part of my development in appreciating literature. And I've heard other, you know, for a long time, I would like never admit that to anybody. And then finally I was like, you know what, I'm going to own it. That was my experience. And, you know, then,
well, that's what was available to you too,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so, and I feel like it's so wonderful that there are so many genres and so many kinds of work out there, because we need different things for different parts of our lives.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then moving on, so then high school, college, did you have your eye on writing? Was this something you wanted to pursue either vocationally or avocationally?
Yes, my main goal was that I wanted to be able to have to get paid to write. That was my thing. And as an undergraduate, my majors were history and German. And I always loved language too. And so my first career was actually as a reporter, as a journalist, because I'm like, okay, now I have a job as a writer. And it was actually being a journalist that I realized how important form is, because every story then demands its own form. And but then I shifted away from that kind of work in my late 20s and sort of got a job working part-time at the University of Oregon. And while I was there, I could take graduate courses for $15 a term, because that was part of like our employee benefits. And so because I worked part-time and I was like freelancing, and I was also trying to get some creative writing done, then I was also taking courses in Comp Lit and English to kind of prepare myself to be able to apply for graduate school, because I decided, well, I would really like to be a professor and I would like to teach literature. So these are kind of some, you know, unexpected developments. But so I did that for 4 years, just taking one course a term and working on developing, you know, a vocabulary and a capacity for doing literature. And then I was able to get into Stanford, and I went into modern thought and literature, which is an interdisciplinary literature program. And I came out in 2007 and came directly to Berkeley, and I've been here since then. And my first book was this academic book, but then I was always writing these stories on the side. And after I got tenure, I was like, well, now I'm going to publish these stories because it's also part of my intellectual profile, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you ever go back to journalism? Do you find yourself either writing op-eds or, you know, that short form? Does that attract you?
I would love to do that. I definitely like to write essays, and I often want to write op-eds, but I'm like, I have no time. So I wish I could do more public writing.
Right, right. Let's talk about your process itself. So once you have an idea, how do you proceed? Do you take notes? Do you outline? Is it different for different pieces?
Yes, I would think, I would say that it is different. I write by hand a lot, and then I'm kind of slow and steady wins the race type, where if I'm writing some piece of prose, then I'll just every day try to write 200 words and keep a list of things that I think this piece needs. And, you know, just try to feed it in.
So you write in longhand?
I do.
Oh, it's
But
so nice to
then,
meet you. I do too. There's not many of us.
yes, here's like
Yeah,
little,
no,
yeah, this is what it looks like.
I have to start. That has to be my first, my first attempt. I do
Yeah,
that. Then I will go, to the
exactly.
word processor. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you
everything
talk a little bit
starts.
more about that? About, I mean, what's going on? What in terms of your creativity, whether it's scholarly writing or fiction? What is it about writing by hand?
Yeah, there's something that's more intimate with the body, and that's freer, and that's also, I don't know. I usually, when I'm teaching, I make people write by hand because I believe that there's some kind of filtering process that helps you get to the truth. So part of this is, your body wants to do the most efficient thing possible. So when you're doing something kind of inefficient, like writing by hand, it's going to kind of cut through some steps so that what comes out, what you expend your energy on, is closer to where you want to be, compared to when you're typing and you can write like lots of words a minute, and you can kind of blah, blah, blah. I mean, I need to do some of that sometimes too. But usually when I want to get to the heart of something, or just get started on an idea, explore an idea, I write by hand. When I'm really stuck, I switch hands and write with my non-dominant hand. Like my right hand will say, "What is this about?" And then the left hand has to answer. And that's another way to kind of mix up the thing. Like you have to draw this stuff out of your body. And so I think of it as a very sort of physical kind of work, and just the having a pen or pencil if you're really hardcore, because the pencil actually gives more resistance and makes it harder. So there's some kind of continuity that I feel about moving something through myself onto the page that somehow I can do with a journal and pen. Sometimes if I turn something's not coming out, if I turn my journal sideways and try to write sideways or without punctuation, whatever it is, I can like dig it out. But that said, once something gets started, then it's all on the computer, because then you have to be efficient. You have to, make it ready as a manuscript. And then I go back to the journal when I get stuck. I also use my journal just to get stuff out of my system, so that I, just to clear the decks. That, I get up, I had some weird dream, and I'm like, I had this weird dream that blah, blah, blah. And then I can kind of clear stuff out of my head or heart so that I can get going.
Thank you for explaining that. I don't know if the same thing applies to me, but I could never explain why I was drawn to writing by hand. But I'm going to try some of those tips too, writing sideways, left-handed. Yeah, I love that. So back to your journalism days, you had deadlines to that you had to meet. And every writer has a deadline. What's your relationship to deadlines? How do you deal with them?
Love deadlines.
Tell me more.
Well, because the deadline is your gift. And one of the things that I learned as a journalist is all knowledge is provisional. So it's like when you finish your story, that's like, okay, that's everything we know as of 4 o'clock, and put it in. Then you can update the story. The story keeps changing. You keep chasing it, whatever. But there is this deadline, and you have to accept the limitations of your story. And so, you just do your best and hand it in, and then walk away and get up the next day and see what the story is. And I think this really helped me in graduate school because I didn't torture myself over having not read every single book I probably should have. This is probably not what I should be saying, but then there's this gift of the deadline of having to accept limitations. And so you do your best to make the very best thing you can by the time that is due, and sort of trust that there will be revisions, there will be, you can return to it and so on, or you can just move on. So I love having deadlines. I've become worse at meeting deadlines since I've become a professor, but I still try to be on it as much as I can, or be as close as I can, because I do see it as a gift to be released of the thing that's needed, and to accept flaws in the work. It's like you just, I'm sure, what is that expression? Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah, right,
or
right,
something
right.
like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
right, right.
I see other people torturing themselves trying to be perfect, and you're like, no, there's no perfect.
Right.
There's just done.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
I'm a big fan of deadlines.
And do you set deadlines for yourself? Do you say, I'm going to get this done by this time?
Yeah, I'm one of those people who really needs structure to do anything. Like I can't do yoga on my own. I have to take a class. I need these structures. So structures work really well for me. Not everybody is wired that way, but I just however you're wired, work with it, not against it.
Right, and you're drawn to structure as a writer too. I mean, structure is important to you. This is, this drives you. So we know you're busy, as are so many academics and writers who try to balance it. But when do you write? Is there a specific time of day or week? Do you write every day?
I try to write every day. I usually, when we give advice to our incoming graduate students, I'm like, keep your butt in the chair, get your butt out of the chair. So it's like, right, but then get up, take care of your body, because part of the writing process for me is sitting there writing and then going for a walk. And because you write with your body so much, and you need your body to be healthy, and you need things to flow through your body. So especially if you are dealing with heavy topics, you have to really take care of your body and not let things lodge in your body. So I try to write every day, but I try to write a little bit. And I think that this actually then affects how my stories come. This may be why I'm a short story writer, is because I can just work in these little pieces. And I think you can see a lot of that sort of anecdotal writing in my work. I think it actually affects the overall form that I'm always, writing when I'm waiting for something, or, but I do try to prioritize my own writing and do that first before email or other things, which is why I apologize to anyone who knows me. I'm always late answering emails.
Is there a specific time of day?
Even if you don't. To write in the morning.
Okay.
In the morning is my favorite time to write.
Okay. And is that because you're freshest, because it's the beginning?
It's both fresh and it's also raw, because I've just dreamed something, or I wake up feeling a certain way that I have to sort through or want to, and it's quiet and there's coffee. All the elements that, work for me are happening then.
Well, I was going to ask you what you needed to write. So coffee, is there a specific place that you write? Do you have, a certain setting that is ideal for you, even if you don't have it every time?
Right. I love to just, I have a chair in my living room and my coffee, and like to write. But I also love to write in cafes or in the library, because I love having other people's energy around me, but not, directly interfacing with anybody. I love being in a place where there's energy. So that's one place I always think I should be able to write and never can is outside. Like I'm going to go to the park, and it's like, no, I can't. I don't know why.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, I have trouble outside too. Are you a fast writer, a slow writer? How would you categorize yourself?
Um,
And it's all relative. I'm wondering how
right.
you think of yourself.
Well, I think of myself as like the writing I do each day. I think of it as pretty fast, but then like actually finishing things, I feel like I'm pretty slow. So, because it's taken me a long time to finish each thing. I'm going to go with slow writer.
Okay. There's no right answer or wrong answer. Would you say that writing comes easily to you, comes easy for you, and has it always?
I think that the easy part is the impulse to write. So I think like I always want to write. And so that part is easy because it's easy to start writing, but it's not easy to make the thing that you're trying to write, or to sort of get through some of the things that you're trying to express. And just sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I were a better writer. Like, or sometimes writing a story, I'll be like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's just like, and one of my journalism professors said this wonderful thing that I think is very true. He's like, there's only two happy moments in writing a story. It's when you think of it and when you hand it in. It's like, and so that's where I'm like, and when you hand it in, then you're on the up again and you're like ready to go again, but the actual writing process isn't always pleasant, but it's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like running, it's like, I don't enjoy running every time I run, but I'm always glad that I run. I'm always, like, why do you run? I run in order to stop running. I write so that then I can stop writing. It's like, there's there's more, you are always glad that you did it, no matter what the experience of doing it is.
Sure. I
So,
was going to ask you, do you enjoy writing, or do you enjoy having written, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, it's always a mix of both. I mean, sometimes I have the happiest day writing is because I've like discovered something, I had an idea or something came together, or it's like so super happy. And then some days it's just like a terrible day of writing. So the great days are great days, and the terrible days are still really, really good because you were there, you did it, you went through it. And those things that wouldn't flow, that wouldn't come out, that were just like not good enough, you can go back and work on them. Or getting through that means that the next time it's going to be better. So you're still building muscles. You're still like doing the thing that makes you a writer. So I guess there are no bad writing days.
Do you ever have writer's block?
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Okay. And different people have different definitions of writer's block. I mean, for some people it lasts for years. For some people it's, an afternoon. But I'm just curious, I mean, what it means to you, and if you have it, and how you deal with it.
I am one of those people who has very short-term writer's block. If I can't write something, I will just keep, trying new things to, so I was like, okay, I can't write this right now. I'm going to work on this. So I have a lot of projects going. So that really helps, because I'm like, okay, this is not coming together. I'm going to do this instead. When I was working on my dissertation or my book, sometimes I'd get stuck and I'd be like, okay, time to do some bibliographic entries, time to do something, but just to keep writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I always have sort of athletics as my two main metaphors are athletics and reality television shows. But, if you're an athlete, sometimes you can't do your thing, you have to rehab. And so, yeah, maybe you have to do things at a different pace or do something else, but you still have to use your body in some way. You have to keep, feeding it. And I find it very inspiring writers who said, yeah, I couldn't write for 5 years or something. And I just think amazing that then they come back and
then you come back.
write this
Yeah.
huge thing, you know. I haven't had that kind of experience. I've just kept going, or sort of been through kind of rehab or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a couple more nuts and bolts questions. I hope you don't mind really digging into your process.
No.
And then I do want to open it up to the audience. So if you do have a question, you'll be able to put it in the chat, and I will be able to read them and share them with Beth. You did show me your, I guess that was your journal. You showed me a page.
Oh, yeah.
Do you keep that regularly? How does the journal fit into your writing life?
Yeah, usually it's what I do first is when I sit down to write, I just spend 15 minutes writing in my journal. And also just writing in my journal is just the way that I process and that's just free space. That's no rules. That can be like, I heard this thing on the radio, or, oh, I think I should include something about this in this piece that I'm writing. And sometimes it's like, I had this weird dream. And sometimes it's like, I suck as a writer, like it can just be anything. And then also I usually have an extra piece of paper next to me, and that's where the shopping list and the don't forget to call so-and-so thing goes, because, it's just warming up your mind and stuff. And then sometimes I'll just come across a great line or something and just be like, I'm going straight to my computer now. And then I just go and start writing something. So I find my journal writing just really, really important, and also a great place to try prompts, just to mix things up. Do a prompt that has nothing to do with anything I'm trying to write, but is just a little challenge. And that, because of that compass, even if you're being asked to write something that seems completely apart from anything that you're working on or thinking about, something about that prompt is going to pull out some part of something that you are working on. So I love little writing prompts, and I love writing with writing prompts. Again, this is just like the yoga class. I need someone yelling at me, not yelling, gently suggesting things. I love having a writing partner that we're like, okay, 30 minutes or 15 minutes, 10 minutes, do this. And we both write whatever we can and then share, So I'm a big fan of having those little writing prompts. In fact, we're going to be doing more of those at the ARC, at the Arts Research Center, which, since I have the little green box right now, I'm going to
plug it, please.
We are going to be offering more writing prompts and writing support. And one thing that's coming up later this month is submission happy hour. So for all you writers out there who have poems or short stories or photography or whatever, come on the 29th to the ARC, and we'll all submit stuff together and have some happy mocktails and snacks and inspiration from published writers.
Fantastic. Where can people get more information? Is there an online presence?
Yes, for the Arts Research Center, there's information on our website.
Fantastic, fantastic. We actually have to talk about the other end of writing, which is revision. I mean, the old chestnut, writing is rewriting. What's your drafting process like, and what's your revision process like?
One of the great things about having been a journalist is that I got to work with editors every single day, and every single time the editor makes your story better. And so really loving the experience of revision, even though it can be so hard the way that I revise is usually, I know something's wrong. So there are different levels of it. Sometimes it's like, oh, I know there's something wrong with this paragraph and I'm just going to try to fix it. But then sometimes there are major things wrong with the story, with a character who isn't quite there, with the pacing, whatever it is. And that's when I need to go to one of my writer friends and say, will you read this for me and give me some feedback? Here's what I think is not working, and it's such an important thing to have a community of writers or teachers or editors, whoever can help you sort of see how to draw out elements so that you can get there. And for me, the excruciating part of that isn't getting the feedback or even doing the work, but putting forward the work and being like, oh, this is really cringy right now, and it's embarrassing for me to show this to you, but I know it can be good someday if you can help me get there. And then being a reader for other people, helping other people revise their work, and having that posture of like, I want you to achieve your vision, that is also really helpful to then being able to, work on our things. And sometimes it's hard to cut or eliminate a character or take something out. And so I have a file on my computer called Green Room because the green room is where the guest sits when they're waiting to come on stage, because sometimes I'm attached to things I write and I'm like, well, I don't want to just like kill you off, but I'm just going to put you in the green room and someday it'll be your turn to come on stage in some other piece. I actually never even look at that file, but
I love that.
Psychologically, like I need to just
instead of killing your darlings, you just put them in the green. Oh, I love that.
They have some snacks. They're comfortable. They'll come on stage later.
That's great. Do you have some trusted readers that will always read your work, that that you can go to them and that they get you and they'll give you solid feedback?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's, I think, a really important part of the revision process for me, is to have those kind of generous, brilliant, friendly readers.
And are they all writers themselves?
Mm-hmm. And many of them are like me, people who are academics and writers, or they are writers who teach creative writing. So I've just been very lucky to be in a community of writers.
And thank you for sharing that even you, a published writer, an accomplished writer, have cringe-worthy, that you consider cringy writing, right?
So cringy. One of my friends said it's like putting on a wet bathing suit. It's just like, oh.
At what point do you seek feedback? When do you think, okay, even if I'm going to cringe, this is ready to give to someone? Do you know when it's ready? Ready to be read by someone else?
Yeah. First full draft, or first time that it's complete, even if there are sort of weaknesses in some places. So I want to have like a complete thing that's like as good as it can be and complete. Like when I get to a point where I'm like, I think if I keep tinkering with this, I'm going to mess it up. To me, that's the point of like, someone else needs to work on it, because you can like start taking away the good stuff if you don't get some of that feedback. So that's the measure for me.
Okay. Another chestnut is, if you want to learn how to write, you have to read. So what do you read? What's on your bedside table right now?
I love, I love keeping up with the contemporary fiction that's coming out all the time. Some of my favorite authors are Danielle Evans, great short story writer, Miriam Taves, who's an amazing novelist, Louise Erdrich, although she's so prolific. I was just telling somebody I can't even read.
Oh, you may have frozen. I'm going to look at the chat for questions while we're waiting. And I do have some questions. I don't know if I'm frozen too. Okay. So I'm looking at these questions. Thank you for these questions, and we will get to these. And I bet Beth is going to join us again. It looks like I'm not frozen. Well, that's good to hear. I didn't feel frozen. Thank you for everyone letting me know in the chat. It's good not to be frozen. Let me just say that. So I hope Beth can join us again. If not, we are close to the end. So if you wouldn't mind bearing with me, folks, we will see if Beth joins us again. But we are taking questions in the chat. It's not too late. And more confirmation that I'm not frozen. So I'm actually going to read a couple of these questions and we'll see if we can, I'll repeat them for Beth if she can join us. One of these questions from William is, how segmented or focused is your writing process in terms of genre? Can you write academic and literary pieces simultaneously? That's a really good question. Okay. We will give her a couple of more minutes. Any questions for me? Or requests? Thank you. Thank you for that. What am I working on? I'm working on getting through this interview. Genre juggling. Well, I can talk a little bit about that. Yes, like Beth, I find that trying to work on two different things at the same time can be challenging, but it's a good exercise. Well, I am going to go ahead and make an executive decision, and we are going to wrap this up right now. So thank you all for joining us. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all your questions. I think this was a fabulous conversation with scholar and creative writer Beth Piatote. For your information, if you aren't familiar with Berkeley Writers at Work, we have all of our past interviews, the past 25 years worth of interviews archived, both on our website. We also have a YouTube channel. You can Google Berkeley Writers at Work. This will be included, this interview, once it's captioned, we will have this included. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.